we shall crack on after a good presentation with the Rail Minister there, who, judging by the crowd opposite, is holding court in the Global Centre for Rail Excellence. Right, I have before you Lord Peter Hendy, CBE, Chair of Network Rail. I'm sure many people know Peter and don't need a big introduction about his career in public transport. Firstly in buses, I think, as a bus driver, Peter, yeah?
Conductor.
Conductor, and then a driver. And then in bus management and privatisation, and then moved over into rail. Famously, Commissioner of Transport for London under Ken Livingstone. And he then segued neatly to Boris Johnson, which I think impressed most of us. I think there was a view that Peter might not make that transition, but he did incredibly successfully, and played a huge role in delivering the transport arrangements for the Olympics in 2012, which was a resounding success. I think it was 2015 you're appointed as Chair of Network Rail.
Seems like yesterday.
And has been reappointed times since, including very recently, otherwise you'd have been moving on fairly soon, wouldn't you?
I would.
So Peter's going to make a speech and then we'll have a chat. So,
good.
Peter, over to you.
Right. Morning, everybody. Nigel said we're just going to have a chat, but I read that and it said I'm making a speech, which is just as well because I wrote it on the train on the way here. So anyway, good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see you. I'm sorry I wasn't here for the Rail Minister's speech, but you can compare what I say with what he said and take a view about whether we're on the same page or not. So it's really nice to see you all again. Nice to see Nigel. Nigel's ability to attract the best speakers is unrivaled. I don't know what Bow would do without him, but it's very good to be here, and it's very good to be here with so many other good speakers. I know you had Andrew yesterday, you just had Hugh, you've got Ian in a minute. It's a first-class event, first-class exhibition, and a first-class range of speakers. And also you got me. Whether I'm a first-class speaker or not, you can judge after this. Here I am now, Lord Hendy of Richmond Hill. I'm honoured to be in the House of Lords, so I'm really rather relieved my name wasn't on Boris's resignation list, because that didn't seem to be a particularly grand bunch of people, and I know some of them, and I can attest to that. As Nigel says, I've been freshly reappointed as the Chair of Network Rail for another 2 years, and now at the grand old age of 70. So if I manage to complete it without falling over, I will actually have done more time at Network Rail than the 9.5 years I did as the Commissioner of TfL. And lest you think otherwise, I think it's really unlikely I can do any longer. I think governance is against that. I think my age will be against it at 72, and also people get fed up with you. And anyway, I'd like to enjoy being a member of the House of Lords for a bit, so and none of us last forever. So I was just trying to work out as we passed Reading this morning what I could possibly say after Andrew spoke yesterday and Hugh, and you just listened to Hugh. Well, I generally start with what the railway is for, because as I've say quite frequently, and I've certainly said before and probably here, the railway is so hard to manage. The massive effort that so many people, including I'm sure most of you, put in to make a complex structure work every day, that we all forget too often to remind people what the railway is for and why government puts so much money into it. And the answer is railways deliver connectivity, and connectivity creates economic growth, jobs, housing, social cohesion and sustainability. And I no longer need to write that down because I use those 5 things very often, and I'll use them 2 or 3 times today, just because it's helpful to remind us what the railway is for, what the end result of it is for. And despite COVID and despite all our faults, it's still really good at it. And what does every town in Britain not on the railway network want? They want a rail connection. And if you are on the railway network, what do you want? You want better services. So look at the effect on Oakhampton. You'll all know it was a fairly easy job for restoring your railways, one of well over 100 submissions, which tells you something about how many people in Britain live in places without railways that want them. I was privileged to be there on opening day. We arrived, there was brass band playing Land of Hope and Glory. Virtually the entire town had turned up on the station. And Grant Shapps, remember him? He's one of the many Secretaries of State. He said, and this is a good quote, it was the best day of his term as the Secretary of State. And it's had an absolutely, the reopening of the railway at Oakhampton's had an absolutely electric effect on the economy of Oakhampton. There's loads of house building going on, and there's already talk of a second station to take people to work and play and public facilities in Exeter. And what about Bradford, where I'm going later, incidentally via Worcester Parkway, New Street and Leeds, if you're interested. It's the 7th most populous area in Britain, according to Wikipedia, and certainly the youngest city by age of population in the UK. Bradford is desperate for better connectivity to get their young people into jobs and create wealth. And actually that's why they've asked me to go. I'm a pretty unlikely person to go to the opening of the Bradford Literary Festival, but I'm not believing that they want me there for my literary skills. They want to lobby me about better railways, and Hugh knows that well too because he's been there. And nothing else but a better railway will do for the economic prospects of Bradford. And on the way, even Worcestershire Parkway, opened in 2020, it's going to enable 10,000 new homes, 123 acres of employment sites, a new town centre, 9 schools and health facilities. Railways do bring growth, jobs and housing wherever you put them. And look at the reception from Boris's integrated rail plan. Grandiose, yes. Prioritised, no. Costed, no. Were those the criticisms? No, they weren't. For many, the criticism was that a £96 billion plan should have been a £107 billion plan. Everyone wants a better railway now because connectivity creates growth, jobs and housing. So where's the industry then faced with this wild enthusiasm for more and better railways? Well, working very hard in much less than ideal circumstances. Passenger revenue is, well, Hugh quoted it at the committee yesterday morning, so he must be right, 73% pre-COVID figure, pre-COVID revenue. We've got prolonged industrial action and we've got widespread dissatisfaction with what looks like a lack of direction for the industry as a whole. And yet, when I was writing that, I thought, well, actually, the Network Rail CP7 settlement actually is not bad, really. You've seen criticism that we might not keep up with the performance metrics, but actually it's £1 billion more than CP6, which is quite an achievement given the economic circumstances. So look, 2 things. One of which is we can't be insured against the wider economic position of the UK. Any business with 3/4 of its income would take action to reduce costs, and the railway has to too. And our record isn't good. We went through and inflicted on the public and the rest of the industry real industrial pain to get a settlement which will deliver, we expect, productivity. The TOCs still haven't achieved it, and the Treasury, I'm sure Andrew said this yesterday, well, he told me he did, so I'm sure he did. The Treasury are deeply sceptical of the railway industry, having watched, for example, real wages in the industry rise continuously over 25 years, and they're sceptical that the industry can deliver cost savings without minute control. Even at Network Rail, the test is whether we achieve what we promised in the hard-fought productivity and bitterly contested in some cases. And for the benefit of people at this show, everything costs too much, which is why we need innovation. Andrew was also raging last night. Somebody I'm sure will tell me, in fact they told me on the train on the way here, that actually we're still too slow and too wooden at dealing with SMEs who've got good ideas to save money and do jobs better. And actually watch this space, because he's taken away from the criticism he got yesterday a passion to do something about how slow we are at looking and taking benefit of SMEs particularly and innovation. The other thing I'd say is that the industry is organised badly and wrongly. Forget where we've come from, forget all the good things that have happened since 1994, but now it doesn't work very well. Too many parties, too many contracts, and more to the point, misaligned incentives which too often drive the wrong behaviours. Which is why on both counts I think we need reform. In costs, We need to streamline structures. We need to stop the stupid balkanisation of track and train, of profit and loss and cost and revenue. Passenger revenues accrue now directly to the Treasury and costs remain with the DfT. You wouldn't run a sweet shop like that, and you certainly wouldn't run a national railway network. And in fact, this is really urgent to reduce costs generally, because despite the fact that the Treasury don't seem particularly keen on reform, they took the savings we promised it could deliver with alacrity and have already applied them to their view about the subsidy the railway needs to deliver for Britain. So the gap between what they're expecting to pay and what we were all costing is widening already. And in structures, well, Keith Williams' report seems a long time ago, but his diagnosis, if you remember, wasn't an organisational structure that he dreamed up having been in the railway for 30 years. It was derived after asking passengers and freight customers what they wanted, and he worked from there. And he proposed a guiding mind, regionally organised, to bring infrastructure and operations together and to remedy some of the failings which the industry has, and certainly has more post-COVID. He didn't prescribe public or private ownership of train operating companies, but actually the way the polls in the economy are going, the next government are going to decide that anyway. Is that a disaster? Well, I don't think it is really. Actually, I ran Transport for London. It was a mixed economy. We ran the tube ourselves. We had contracted bus operation. We contracted the overground. We were even a regulator for taxis, God rest my soul. But that mixed economy delivered. And actually the interesting thing is, because it delivered, there's no debate about whether the underground should be publicly run or not, or whether the bus service should be run by contractors. People are focused on the delivery of TfL for the benefit of London's economy and society. And I think that actually that's where we want to get to in the rail industry. And I just remind you that actually the total turnover in very broad terms of the rail industry is 20 billion a year. And this debate about whether the train companies are in the private sector or not is actually quite a small one. 4/5 of that money is already spent in the private sector, and it's spent on much of it on the companies that are represented at this exhibition today. So not everybody likes the idea of reform. The Treasury don't really seem to be believers. Some train operating company owning groups don't seem very keen. Some civil servants, although not the leadership of the DfT and certainly not the ministers. A few Tory MPs. But actually the other thing is, no one knows what else to do. If you don't like GBR and you don't like reform, the only option is to stay where we are, with the DfT specifying so minutely the detail of every aspect of passenger services that it's now actually easier for us to recruit somebody as a nationalised industry on Waterloo Station than it is for Clare Mann at South Western Railway. And that actually is a very curious position to be in. And incidentally, the biggest owning group of them all, who's that? It's HM Government. There are more train companies in public ownership than there are in... it's a bigger owning group than any of the other owning groups. So that's a pretty curious outcome too. So for me, change is inevitable. We are dead lucky. We've got a rail minister who is committed to reform, bright, personable, effective politician, Hugh, who you just heard if you were here. And we've got a Secretary of State who nailed his colours to the mast on reform in February in the Bradshaw address. We might not get legislation, and if we can't find another way round with secondary legislation, and that might still happen, we'll have to do the best we can, and GBR transition team and Annette and others are on that case. We've got loads of support from the combined authority mayors in Wales and quietly from Scotland, who see that the effective regionalisation and a better railway is on the cards if GBR happens. And what we also know is that passengers want a clearer, better deal through information, fares and ticketing, which is what Keith commented on in his report. And that's why Andrew and I so strongly support Hugh and the Secretary of State in this endeavour. No one knows what else to do. You either do this or you don't do anything. And the industry needs to save cost urgently, it needs to generate revenue, and it needs a clearer structure as a matter of extreme urgency. And if we don't do something, We'll get a new government at the latest by January 2025 and more likely sometime next year. And if we're not already on the way to reform, I predict that they'll come in and say, what the bloody hell is this mess all about? Why hasn't somebody fixed it? And the answer is that if we haven't been good enough, they'll do it to us and not with us, which is why the best thing to do is to get on with it now. And of course, the real prize is to get better at delivering the connectivity that everybody wants, to fuel the national economic revival that clearly, on yesterday's figures, we so badly need. And God knows we really need that urgently. And as I finish, just by the way, and it's a reflection on my age and my term of office, why not do this whilst Andrew and I are still around? Because it'll still have to happen, whether we're there or not. Thank you very much for listening. I'll answer your questions. How's that? Oh.
Thanks, Peter. Those words, if we don't sort it, they'll do it to us rather than with us, is a very clear warning. And your final words are words I've used myself, Peter, in private, not yet in an editorial. I've said that whatever happens has to happen, and it has to be at least established and starting to work before Peter's next 2 years expires. In which case, also, and before Andrew's wife says enough, you're getting nowhere, and takes him at it, because the demands and stress on Andrew Haynes are huge. But I've worked with, having been around since the early part of the 12th century in railway journalism, I was there when Railtrack was founded, and I've worked with every chairman and chief executive of Network Rail from Bob Horton and John Edmonds going forward. And there have always been dysfunctional partnerships, usually because when we were chief execs of, let's say, varying quality, and chairmen who would often, let me turn that off, totally irrelevant. We had so many former motor company chairmen who thought they could come and apply what they'd learned at Ford to the railway, and it just caused chaos. I mean, it just never worked. But since Peter was appointed in 2015, and that was Andrew before you? Was Andrew before you?
No, he came in 2018.
Right, so once that partnership got together, I've seen an amazing change at Network Rail. It's very fashionable to criticise Network Rail, and I've done my fair share of it myself, and there's still things which I think we ought to hold Peter and Andrew's feet to the fire on. But in general terms, they are the most effective non-exec chairman and chief exec that I've seen, and if we do not get it sorted before then, I think there's going to be hell on. And there's not a lot of time left, so the industry does need to pull together to do it. Right, I'm going to just turn it straight over to questions to the floor. Peter's given plenty to chew on there. So who wants to ask the chairman of Network Rail, Lord Hendy of Richmond Hill, a question? You can't have answered all of them, Pete, for God's sake. There we go, gentleman at the back. Yeah. Was it a gentleman? No, sorry, a lady at the back. I could only see the short hair, I do apologise, down the side of somebody else. But you asked a question yesterday, just to show I am paying attention.
You did. And I'll ask a question again. Emma Roberts, Affinity Consulting. And Lord Hendy, you spoke about change and about people and about we have to do this. Just if there's one thing that we can do between now and the end of this year and we keep that momentum going before we hit CP7, what would it be?
Well, crikey, there's not just one thing. We got loads to do, and as Nigel said, for the avoidance of doubt, I didn't put in the speech that Network Rail can do its job better and cheaper, but actually Andrew and I, if we were asked, we would say that was true, and indeed a nice old guy on the train flipped his newspaper over to me this morning with a headline that says Hugh Merriman says Network Rail could do better. I don't know what he thought he would get by doing it, but I said, yeah, I've just read that in my email. Anyway, that's fine. What do I think? Well, I'll tell you what, one of the things that I think, that the railway is an extraordinary institution, and it's a bit like the National Health. People who work for it are hugely committed. It's a vocation for many, many people. I'm sure if you interviewed 100 people coming out of the gates today or coming in, most of them would say that they're committed to the railway. But that has its disadvantages because there's a sort of structural arthritis about this. which is that many people, when you speak to them, all preferred the organisation before last. They're not, they are actually familiar with change. I mean, I could ask you for a show of hands. Nearly everybody I've ever met on the railway has worked for more than one body. If you've been there for years, you certainly worked for Network Rail, worked for British Rail, and you must have had the misfortune to work for Railtrack in its time. And loads of people have worked for different institutions and have in fact changed very strongly. And and this exhibition is about a level of technical change which embraces many people's skills. But actually there's an overwhelming culture of actually fearing change and thinking it's a bad thing. And I think that's unjustified, and one of the things we need to do is to prepare people better for the future, because the opportunities in this industry are absolutely immense. My wife's parents, who are dead now, both worked for the National Westminster Bank. I remember her father telling me when I was about 25 that working for a bank was about the safest occupation you could get. He was a bank manager in Exmouth. There aren't any bank managers in Exmouth. There aren't any bank managers in Devon. The banks have changed out of all recognition. If you work for the Royal Mail, as Keith Williams might well attest if he was here, that was regarded to be a job of complete certainty. Now, I wouldn't claim that of the institutions in the railway, but what I would say is that if you've got a job in the railway and you're 25 and you're willing to learn and to train and to adopt new techniques and new technology, you've got a job for the rest of your life. That's a pretty extraordinary guarantee. And also, most people are in pension schemes that actually give you a right arm for, too. And actually, those belie a sense of, oh dear, we don't want change, we're fear of the unknown, all this sort of stuff. And if you look at the industry more widely, it's managed to confront with great difficulty both world wars, the rise of motor travel, beaching and massive changes in people's lives and urbanisation, and now COVID. But it'll survive that too. So actually, I think you can be optimistic about the future. And if there's one thing I'd like people to be, is not afraid of further change. You know, what you're used to after 25 years of privatisation is an industry that was split into 1,000 pieces, and many people made a really good job of both reducing costs and increasing revenue as a consequence. But it is likely to change again, and if it is, what you want is for the people in the industry to confront that with optimism and with resolve and determination to make their own careers better. And I think the last thing I'd say about that is, if I look back on my career since I was a graduate trainee at London Transport, every job I got until I became the Commissioner of TfL was an opportunity created by reorganisation. Every one of them, because it was constantly changing. So actually, it doesn't mean you can't stay as a driver if you want to be, and it's not a bad job, all things considered. But if you want to get on the railway, then actually change is one of the methodologies of doing it. And when we do get to Great British Railways, as surely we will, it will create a whole pile of jobs which need skills that not everybody will have. And the result of that is that you have to appoint people who you think can do the job. When I got a job as the managing director of one of the 11 London bus companies, my mate Steve and I were called in by the guy who's then the chairman, and he said, well, we're taking a big risk with you two. We're not sure you'll make it. You're the youngest people, but we couldn't appoint anybody else. Well, actually, guess what that did to us? We went out and had a big drink, of course, actually, and thought, what a pillock the bloke was. But actually, it also said to us, here's a chance, and we made it. And I think that's what I would say, which is that whilst we go through the gruesome machinations of endless discussion with civil servants and lawyers and the Treasury, and whilst Hugh battles away with the machinery of government to get it done, just pass the view round the railway that this is actually just another phase, and actually if you want to do better and get on, you can, and there'll be some jobs advertised which won't be filled by dead men's shoes, because nobody will have done a regional job commercially with track and train together, and actually apply for that. I think that's a great message, actually. I think that's not a bad message for an industry in a country where the economy is just about to go into decline and where inflation's at 9%. actually we've all got a job and we can all keep one if we want one.
We're actually talking about engineering a recession yesterday, about
Yeah.
bringing one about specifically. But yeah, you're right. Two things I really agree with. Railway men and women, it's not what they do, it's what they are. And that's an incredible strength, which leads to your second comment, that railway men and women will always make it work regardless of what government or the economy or the global politics or war throws at it. And you listed a good few things there, to which I'd add the 1955 modernisation plan,
Absolutely.
the 1955 footplate strike, the 1982 flexible rostering dispute, all those things, and the railway emerged stronger from them as a result. And I hope it will do so again, though it will require much more unity on the railway to take on the Treasury's distrust of the railway's ability to control its costs, I think. Right, we have a few minutes left. Any more questions? Now the hands are coming up. There's a gentleman down here. Is there somebody who hasn't asked a question yet?
Oh, I don't know.
Right, down here.
He got the microphone though.
Oh, somebody else has got it already. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, go on then. And then come to this gentleman. We're probably done then. So,
Hi there.
who you are?
It's Andy, Phil Baldwin from Arthur D. Little. Just a question about the cost for the overall. You talked about the cost pressure that the industry's under, and the 20 billion across it all. And of course, that's broadly split, if I understand, broadly 50-50 between Network Rail and the rail operations, the TOCs. Clearly, cost is a real focus in Network Rail. I see that, and I'm supporting some of that. But within the TOCs, they are currently frozen. They're currently stuck, partly because of the way that national rail contracts work. And Hugh Merriman was commenting on that, and I know you were pushing him, Nigel, about that. I guess my question is, what would you say about how things are today within the TOC's ability to drive costs, and can you see any hope in GBR and the future for unlocking it?
It's a good question. We can't carry on in a business where cost is considered separately from income. As I said, you wouldn't run a sweet shop like that.
Or your own life.
Or your own life, would you? I mean, just occasionally I buy things without telling Sue,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah, but it always comes home to roost.
Normally bits of railway, but I've got some confidence that I'm still earning enough money to pay for them, if I can get it through the bank account without her noticing. But you wouldn't do that. And one of the consequences is that if there's any, people who work for train companies or run them can tell you better than I can, there are people who know that you can either reduce cost or increase revenue. And actually, if you look at those two things in different buckets, they're not capable of getting through the government processes in order to achieve it. And Hugh, rightly, will talk very eloquently about those that have. Normally, somebody's told him that the decisions are so stupid that somebody needs to do something about it. And good for him, he's done something about it. But you can't run anything like that. And I think that actually adjusting the railway to the demand levels which are now placed on it is very badly done on a central corporate basis. The one thing actually that was a bit wrong with the bus tendering system at London buses was that actually too much of it was decided centrally, but at least London was a small enough place that there were people there who had some idea, and generally we had quite a good rapport with the contractors who did the work. And frankly, I made a judgment about how good they were at doing their job, about how much work they should get sometimes. Now, actually, you'll find a lot of frustrated people in train companies who know that you could either increase the revenue or reduce costs. And then normally it's a mixture of both. And that's without the failing of not putting track and train together. So if you ask Network Rail what the solution to a problem is, it's normally infrastructure. Well, why wouldn't it be? That we're an infrastructure company. But actually, if we at TfL on the underground, you would say we've got a passenger demand issue, either rising or falling in a place. What is the best combination of train crew, rolling stock and infrastructure to solve that problem? How cheaply can you do it? How quickly can you do it? And what elements would you put together to achieve it? And I think the railway is spectacularly bad at that. And one more thing, just to say how bad it is, without being able to describe those things in a programme, the chances of getting third parties to pay for them is absolutely zero. And that's a huge weakness for the British Railway. We ought to be asking all sorts of people everywhere to pay for things that create wealth and value locally. So you'll have read somewhere, I think we put out a press release saying Devizes Parkway Station is not value for money. So I asked for the detailed report on this because I'm a bit surprised about it. And of course it isn't value for money because we've costed in, we Network Rail have costed in the cost of the car park and the approach roads and a load of stuff that actually I wouldn't go and ask them. I wouldn't pay for that in TfL. I'd say to the local authority, you want this for the benefit of your economy, you pay for that stuff and we'll build the station. Or even better, you build the bloody station because you might build it cheaper than us. And we don't get any of that opportunity. And then, of course, there's the fact that in order to stop trains at Devizes Parkway, you've got to have a prolonged and agonising debate about whether there's space in the timetable, whether there's enough rolling stock, what the contracts say, and all of that is lugubriously slow, isn't it? So that, you know, I hope there's a bit of passion here coming out. You know, we're all agonising over whether there's 2 timetable changes or 3 a year. I know it's a big network, but actually you never notice some of them on the underground. If it was wrong, we changed it in 8 weeks because it was wrong and it needed to be done for the passengers. And I think there's quite a lot you can say about running a railway in a different, more flexible, more agile way.
Yeah. Really quick, because we're now over time. Can you keep it really short, sir, please?
Be as quick as I can. Yeah, Ken Foster from East West Rail. Peter, taking on from that value proposition, one of the big challenges we face to our industry, particularly building a new railway, is the resistance from the local communities because they don't appreciate the value proposition of the railway. They see a road as something that's free for them to use apart from their road tax because the invisible subsidy through general taxation, whereas we pay for our infrastructure. How do we get over that lack of perception of value that's built into the system?
I mean, it's interesting. I think there's a different issue there because actually you have to go back to what the railway is for. And actually in building a new railway like East West Rail, you've got to understand whether or not the communities it's going to serve actually want the housing and development that is going to result. So personally, I wasn't, you know, I'm employed. I'm not a politician. Personally, I'd have started with the other end of East West Rail, where the local authorities, by and large, are agreed that they need to build 20, 30, or 40,000 houses, and then you're delivering a railway into a community of, well, not necessarily into a community. The community's not there yet, but you're enabling a community to be created, which can only be there as a consequence of the railway. And I think some of this is just painful, isn't it? If you look at the pains that HS2 is going through, then actually I can remember we had friends who lived near the proposed line for HS1. They were virulently against it. Absolute disaster. Do you know what happened? The value of their property went up by 40%.
And nobody notices.
Nobody noticed it. And would you notice HS1 now? No, you wouldn't, actually. It looks quite nice in the landscape. So there's a bit of pain there. But one of the answers is to concentrate not on building the railway, but what the railway is for. And actually, I think, frankly, that you can do worse than at least exploit those elements of the community who want to see some change. We used to live in Bath. It's a really nice Georgian place, really, very rich place, but it has its pockets of poverty. I used to spend my Sunday afternoons, after I'd done my week's work for TfL the next week, supporting planning applications to build new housing in a World Heritage City. Because actually, Sue and I wanted some young people to live there to stop it becoming a geriatric nursery, you know. And actually, there are people who want this development. There are people along the line of East West Rail who would like better connectivity with Oxford. There's a lot of people who work in Oxford who live a long way away because they can't find anywhere to live because houses are too expensive. And you've got to generate that support, haven't you? And in the end, when it's built, the day it opens, nobody will care, actually. And it's true, they won't care how long it took to build or how much it cost, or all of the disruption that it caused. They'll love the connectivity it's delivered. And that's always true of everything, which is why it's so good to build.
And 6 months later, they wonder how they ever manage without it.
Absolutely.
You know.
And of course, all the housing, whatever sort of house you live in, its price goes up.
All right, look, we're a bit over time, so we better stop it there. Thank you, Peter.
Good, thank you.
And thanks to you. You're the best audience I've played against all show. That's been really good. Thanks for the questions, thanks for the attention, and thanks for your support for Rail Live. It's really good to see you all here.
Brilliant.
And
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of the day.